So, Claudia, I'm going to turn it over to you, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. I just want to ask, when you do your questions, am I supposed to disappear off the screen when you
No,
have
not
your
at
question period?
no, not at all.
No?
No. Yeah, the polls will just come up and folks can answer those as well. So I think even you can answer them if you
Okay.
want. All right.
I'm always looking to answer and make questions. So hi everybody. My name is Claudia Hart. I am an artist, and I do what I think my practice is what you call an expanded practice, which means it extends into everything. That includes my job as a teacher, and it includes being an artist, working in a medium. I'm considered a pioneer. I'm actually pretty old, but my Insta filters do such a good facelift job that it makes me look young. But anyway, I'm almost 67 years old, and I'm considered a pioneer in the area of virtual reality. So that means I've been doing this stuff for 30 years. And so my practice as an artist included creating a context for that discipline, that medium, where I was all by myself and lonely. And that's not a good thing when you're an artist. You have to exist in art and the history of art. You have to be part of a movement. So I thought I should create one. And I got a job. And I've been teaching at the Art Institute, I think, for 15 years. And part of my job was to teach what I did and create language around it, and teach other young people, I'm not one of them, how that that practice might be expanded in a more global way. So the story I'm going to tell you is about virtual reality, but its story is my story, and I am a storyteller. So everything becomes personal. So we're going to start this story. So wait a minute, I've been doing the VR stuff for 27 years. I had to figure that out recently. Not 30, not 25, but 27. And yeah, right. So it really was an anomaly that a contemporary artist, and I've been showing my artwork as installation-based art, photos and objects and Super 8 movies. Remember those? Nobody does. Early form of small movies, photographs, sculptures, and all this, and I made environments. So that's what I did, and I fell in love. I saw Toy Story 01 in pre-release at the Berlin Film Festival in '95, and a light bulb went off in my head, and I thought, this is the future. So that was when this whole story began. Now I'm fast tracking, and going to tell you one of the projects that I've done, or the classes that I teach, is called virtual installation. So I mentioned that I was a physical installation artist as a young 20-something. I taught a class called virtual installation. And what I meant by that was augmented reality. So I think, do you know what an augmented reality app is? It's just a thing that lives on your phone. I'm not going to open mine, but we use at school Blip AR. It's a generic app, and we build custom apps with it. So I'm going to zoom ahead. I'm going to share screen and tell you a little bit about the beginning of the story that David wanted me to tell. I'm going to start by talking a little bit about the Romantic app. So the Romantic app was a project I did with my students for virtual installation. And so, as I said, I don't know if you've all used augmented reality, but these are things which use the camera of your phone And when you look at something, you can see, I do what's called image tracking. Like when you look at a QR and it opens up to a menu, that's augmented reality. Or when you look at a QR and it opens an app and it allows you to see stuff floating around, or in the case of what I do, we use images to see animation overlaid into it. And so I did a project over many years called the Romantic App. And in that class, my students and I used the Impressionism collection. I teach at the School of the Art Institute, and the Museum of the Art Institute are part of the same corporation, actually. We are one. And we use the Impressionism and Post-Impressionism collection to make an app where if you looked at the paintings in it, you could see things that weren't there. So this is from my first class, and I wanted to give you a feeling of what that was about. I chose Impressionism, and I was very interested in the Impressionism collection. I'm going to just scroll through this. This is, before I talk, I'll just let you see. These are Impressionist paintings by Monet. So when you open the app on your phone and look at them, the student who did this is Jared Solomon. You would see, he would take colors from one haystack and colors from the other and make them jump across from each other. So they were cross inseminating one another. And so you would be in the museum, look at these two pictures and see that. Here's another one, Sharon Pack on the Manet painting of the fish and stuff on a table. So she put the frying pan under and brought it back alive and made it very visceral, and that was important. Here's another, we had the Rodin famous armless sculpture in there, and Nick Flaherty, when you looked at it, you'd see Facebook thumbs up and down, and that floating on top. Here's another one of what is that? It's Renoir, but this is, you can barely see it. It's personal childhood memories of himself and his father who had died. Here's a GIF. So it's this student took apart the painting and brought it to life in this sort of GIF-like ecstasy of battle and death. Here's another one where we see a painting of the type, in fact, that games are very influenced by. We found out that romantic painting had a big impact on game design. And this is a student who got horses appropriated off of Google that came from games that were put up for people to use and brought them in. So you would see the game horses within the painting that also influenced the game design. So that was the Romantic App. And the reason that we were in there, now where am I here? Going back, I have another one somewhere in here. Oh yeah, here's another Romantic App. We did many versions. And in the end, I wrote a book chapter. Those were the paintings. This was what was added. There was the original painting, and he had this imagination that these were haunted with grotesquerie, and romanticism was about the grotesque and the impossible. And it's not so much what actually was happening in these, which are all very research based, but what the reason I'm bringing them up is that when we did this work, and went into, I originally started to do this project in a Magritte show, surrealist famous painter, who I'm not showing, but we started to do the project. I didn't ask permission from the museum. It was in the modern wing. And we were running around up there testing, and the guards got very enthusiastic and excited, and everybody came over, and the word went out, something magical was happening. And I got word from the top that we couldn't do this because they were afraid that the museum would get sued. And this was in 2014, so there was still more mystery about not just augmented, but what anything was. There was a lot of anxiety about digital art or digital. And we were told by the director that they were afraid that they would be sued for copyright infringement by the Magritte family, who still were alive and owned the copyright of the original paintings. And that's how we ended up in the Impressionism wing, because Gloria Groom, who's the director of the whole old museum, but at that point was the chief curator of European painting and sculpture. And she, in fact, was knighted by the French Republic and became, well, she's a knight. So she had the power to tell us, come to my wing, you may use my paintings. They're all public domain, meaning they were so old that there was no copyright copyright hanging over them. And I was very interested in Impressionism and Romanticism. Let's go back to some of those, because, oh, here's another thing in the, the impact of Impressionism, the reason why Impressionism had the look it had, this is his earlier Romantic painting. Let's see, this young man has become an expert and is now doing his graduate thesis on augmented. So he fell in love. Here's an Impressionism thing with the mountains taken apart and floating in front. But Impressionism was itself very influenced by photography. Here's I think this is a Van Gogh. I think it's a Van Gogh. So even the way the landscape is framed here, it was a slice of life. There weren't these formal compositions. There were wild colors and brushstrokes because it was supposed to be optical, the way your eye actually mixes colors in it and in the real world. There weren't formally framed images. Everything was cropped. It was trying to show what it means to perceive as opposed to the camera. The camera had come in, here's things like trains and steamships, and it was shocking for people. And Impressionism was highly affected by the invention of photography, both trying to understand how it worked, taking compositional strategies for it, but also trying to do something that it couldn't do. So this dialogue between the old and the new was very fascinating to me. And that sort of started me off in the project that I'm going to show you today. So it all grew out of the Romantic app. And in fact, I teach virtual installation this semester. It's the last time I'm doing it. And I wrote a book chapter on this, and I assigned my students to read that. David, maybe you should assign yours. Should you have them read the Romantic app chapter? Yes.
That's a great suggestion, I think. Yes.
That's the next assignment. Yeah, actually, it's a book. So let's go off that for a minute. And David, do you want to talk to me a little? Because I'm about to change channels, and I would rather rather have talk to you a little. I hate talking endlessly by myself. It's very sad.
That's fine. So all of the foundation that you've just given us with the Romantic app, I know that was kind of what led you to the work that we have on display at the Freedman. And we're going to talk more about that in the later segments. But I do want to come back to a couple of things that you've said so that people don't lose this terminology and make sure that they understand this concept of appropriation. So I want to just talk to you a little bit about that. We're going to talk about copyright, I know, as part of that conversation, but those are very important to why you eventually settled on the Matisse work that you did. that's showing that you appropriated and is showing in your work called the Orange Room that's in the gallery. So I know that's a reference to the red paintings, but this earlier work certainly I think influenced that and had a profound impact on that, especially considering all of your early work that you had done, both as an installation artist and also really as a performance artist too, because that's part of your credit as a performance artist as well, I think, correct?
Yeah, I think I am. See, now I'm suddenly I'm off. I'm actually trying to make my website open up, and that's sort of spinning for a moment here. So
We'll get
let's
to that.
hope that it
Yeah,
comes back.
I'm sure it will.
Yeah. All right. So you talked about me as an immersive artist. I mean, I talked about me as an immersive artist. Where are you? Here you are. So 3D animation comes from, you know, it is the kind of style that's used in gaming. When I did it, it was really the beginning. It was Pixar, and then there was the beginning of games, but very little games. That came in the 90s, really, and the later 90s. But the game world is based on the idea of immersion, that you go into a world. And I think my work is immersive. That means I will make everything using that I will make these immersive environments that are theater, where everything is projected on top of itself. And I make installations in galleries where covered with patterns that are augmented wallpaper, and there are objects that are augmented, and there's everything is alive, and you feel like you've stepped into another world. So yeah, and that is like the world of a museum, really. A museum is immersive. All right, we're in my thing, but it's not quite opening. It's only partially opening, but we can fake it. I'm sure we're good at faking it. Although it's, so do you want me to talk about, am I answering you?
Yeah, you can respond to that. Especially as we start to transition and talk about your museum world that you've created. And the Orange Room is one piece, it's one small part of this larger world that you have
Yeah.
that you're going to show us.
All right, so I'm going to start to show it to you, although it's sort of not really showing up. Wait, let's see if I'm going to try opening another Firefox. See if that works better.
Yeah, sometimes the browsers.
Yeah, that one. I'm on 3 browsers now. All right, let's see. Could it be that it's because I'm on 3 browsers? Let me
That
see if I
sometimes
should.
has an effect.
Yeah, I'm going to shut down my Chrome. Chrome is actually terrible. All right, so this one, oh, has this come back now? Oh, it's here. All right, so we're going to go back to my normally favorite choice, opera. I'm going to share again. All right, so are we ready?
Yes.
Technical problems and the ability to tell jokes on top of it are part of my job. So
yeah, we
I
forgot
never
to
get
mention you're
scared.
a
All right,
comedian.
so how's that? Yes, I'm really funny when my technology is working, not when it's not working. All right, so I also want to say I grew up in New York, and I spent a lot of time in museums because there was no place to go out to play. And my mother would drop me off at the Met or the Brooklyn Museum, and I would play in there. So a lot of that is also in this idea of world building. So I talked to you about Impressionism. So that experience with my students, the last time I taught the Romantic app, one of my students wanted to do use a Matisse as a trackable, and she was dismayed to find that the Matisse, there was one Matisse in the old section with the Impressionists, but most Matisse is in the modern wing, along with Picasso. And we were she was very frustrated because we're not allowed to work in the modern wing due to the fact that the Art Institute is afraid of being sued because there is copyright in the modern wing. And believe it or not, Van Goghs are not copyright. That's why you get all those Van Gogh cards and shoulder totes and everything. You can make all those gifts out of Van Goghs in the gift shops because they're public domain. So we asked Gloria, what's going on? Why is there only one Matisse, even though he was post-impressionist, and all the other post-impressionist artists like Vuillard and Bonnard were in the old wing? And Gloria said, every museum fights over Matisse because Matisse, the way a copyright actually starts with modernism. The works in the old wing date from before there was copyright, or they're so old, even if they were insured, nobody from the families are alive anymore. So they go to the public domain, or they come from a time before copyright. I found that fascinating, that copyright began with the two painters who were considered the patriarchs of modernity, Matisse and Picasso. That was fascinating to me. And so I decided to start playing with the one who we were not allowed to use, the beginning of all the brouhaha, and that was Matisse. And this was before there was COVID and before there was Black Lives Matter. Because it takes forever for me to make these works, I started working on a show for the gallery called Bitforms, where I show in New York. Are these big enough to see in the share screen? David, yeah? Yeah, okay. So, and I did a show where I'm sort of thinking in terms of, I'm looking at Matisse, but I'm not copying. And I'm gonna show you these, that's a sculpture that was made with CNC routing with wood and a 3D printing of one of the bouquets of actually Henri Lafitte Latour, another one of the artists within the collection that we were augmenting and working with. So I wanna, that's a computer-driven router and 3D printing resin, a computer-driven router with real wood. It's one piece and walnut. And I'm gonna just zip ahead a little. They have this sense of gravity because in a simulated world, you can simulate forces of nature and make things have a feeling of gravity. And then I would simplify them and make them into printable models, like airtight, low resolution models. I'm gonna show you these movies. That's the one that's in the show. Also, playing off the large table piece by Matisse. This is from my VR, social VR environment where we could go in and look at it. I actually built the show because during lockdown, you couldn't go into real life. I want to show you the movies. That's the 3D world. Wait, let's get it. Are we stuck? I'm going to show you the movies because when I made the movies, I was thinking about time. There's the one in the show. I'm going to show a couple that aren't in the show. And I was thinking that if a painting, I was thinking about XYZ space. So is it moving? Yeah. So if a painting existed, it would move very slowly. So this has a clock that does a minute. And I'm thinking when I make these of using my XYZ space, which is a game space, which is Cartesian grid, and trying to flatten it the way Matisse also flattened the world when he was resisting photography by developing an abstracted style in resistance to realism, in resistance to photography. And I decided to, and then I live in a world of simulated software that's based on modeling the real. And I'll talk a little bit about that after we look at this. And then in my world, I can both have real time. So there we have a clock that's actually telling real time. And the very slow moving, using forces of gravity in nature. I don't hand animate like a flip book. I submit my stuff to forces, and I'm trying to go from the simulated XYZ rounded game space and to reflatten it and to compress time so that it's working at many rates and to make this sort of infinite, a perpetual present. So it's actually like a minute that just keeps repeating itself all the time. And I think I want to talk a little bit about modeling after, let's see. I want to escape this. And escape. Here's another one that's from the famous, this one, Green Table. This was based on the Blue Table from 1947 by Matisse. So I always flip the colors. So mine's green and red. His was blue and turquoise or something. This is also from another famous painting. They have the compositional structures, but I'm not copying one from 2011, the Red Studio, and I'm gonna play that for a minute too. Let's make it big. What? Okay, let's move this. Again, this is like an infinite minute where everything is moving at slightly different rates, as if they're actually faster than plants. They're not really, actually. I spend a lot of time looking at how fast plants move because I'm trying to simulate the real rate of plants. And plants, when they're outdoors, do move around a lot. The plants indoors also move because there's air pressure and there's things happening that move them, but they're not obviously outside in the open air. So I'm trying to also simulate the real speed of plants, which are moving much more than you think, but there's this slow unwinding of things that's very hypnotic. And mesmerism comes from slow things happening on top of one another at different rates. That's actually how people are hypnotized. So I tried to make these works a kind of expanding of time in an impossible way, a moment that lasts forever, a moment of contemplation. And using that with game culture, game language, game tools, where it's usually fast, violent, expressive, and people are killing each other. So I'm sort of flipping that over. Let's see.
Can we take
And
a
then
look?
the same thing. This one?
Claudia, I was just going to ask if we could take a look too at the orange room a little closer in case folks haven't gotten in to see it yet.
Yeah, let's see it. I was just coming to it.
Okay.
So the orange room was actually called the red room. And I put myself in there. In fact, you could see it. That's me. And on my lap is the original red painting. So again, these are just 1 minutes that are looped. And again, I'm always paying a big attention to, please run. Maybe it's the internet. Oh, here it goes.
Yeah, looks like it's running.
Yeah.
And now I can really see the similarity to the 3D model that you had of the flowers that you showed us earlier. That's really apparent.
Yeah, that's that's the same model that I used for the flowers. Yeah. And now I'm actually making augmented reality app where you can look at, it's for porcelain. So here, it's plates. So they're handmade porcelain plates. And when you look at them, this is actually a QR code. And then through the app, you can see through the phone a very detailed little still life. Like I stole some of those, in fact, and put them on there. So I recycle these because it's so slow and labor intensive to make these things. I try to squeeze all the juice out of the lemon. So everything's alive here and working at a different rate. So the animated table and the painting or the pictures out the window and the flowers, and I'm breathing in and out, and that's sort of pulsing the pattern. And I've translated Matisse's desire to use these exotic patterns into noise, digital noise. That's actually algorithmic noise. So he would make patterns inspired by, excuse me, Middle Eastern motifs that were also mathematical and algorithmic and traditional. So I generate algorithmic patterns with the computer. That's a kind of contemporary version, although they don't look like them, but I'm trying to keep to the same deeper ideas and work at the same time in opposition. And then I want to go on to this piece, which is the ruins, and that will bring us into talking a bit about NFT. But do you want to break a minute and ask me anything? Let me stop sharing.
Yeah,
because it gets boring.
The work that we just saw is the one that's on view in the gallery now. That's called the Orange Room. So why don't we break for a second and take our first poll? And as folks are doing that, you and I can have a little chat, and that will continue on through the poll. So here's our first poll.
Should I take it too?
If you want, yep.
Will that throw it all off?
No, not at all.
I'm prejudiced.
Pretty simple. Just making
No,
sure
you
that...
could talk to me. I'll minimize it. It's
Gotcha.
okay. So you want to chat?
Yeah, I do.
Hi.
I am also really interested too, just how your experience, especially as a female, as an artist, as a performer, all of that, how you transitioned into kind of digital technology, how that influenced that decision, and also your perceptions, having studied as an art historian, kind of this canon of art history that's filled with basically white men, and how that shaped what you are doing today and what really has made you passionate about what you're doing today.
Well, I think actually from the very beginning, I fell in love with the simulations technologies because I saw it as connecting the dots between old-fashioned perspective drawing and this kind of magical realism, the desire for humans to recreate the reality, but in their own terms. So I was somebody who was in love with Dürer and perspective machines, and I could draw. I would like fake them and do that. I was in love with Vermeer, who used the camera obscura to make a reflection onto the canvas, and then with a lens. And so this idea of magical world building fed into my experience as a child, where I would be lost in the historic rooms of the Met. And it was so much that it was the Metropolitan Museum with all their history rooms and the way they recreated hangings. It was a magical escape with people from another time. And I always found history itself to be a kind of a flight from the real, but paralleling our world, and how people were the same and different. And I somehow felt that simulated realities and world building was like that. And in fact, in multiplayer multi-user online world building, people are addicted to magical worlds for the same reason. It's about a kind of parallel construction that is it is reflecting our world and some of the horrible things in it, like war, right? Like political strategy and tricking people. But at the same time, you get to be another person, and it's fantastical. And I felt museums were that. And I also felt that VR was that. when I arrived in the land of VR, when I first started doing it in the mid 90s, I was very surprised to find myself to be the only woman and the only person who didn't come from the military. And I was a feminist, you know, coming from the contemporary art world where we were wild identity politics people. I lived in a world of queer men and women, and I didn't know any people from the military, let me put it that way. And so I found myself in this completely strange environment. And not just that, but I was shocked. I was shocked. Like the prize winning awards that were given to basically, you know, guys who had come out of the military were now researchers in VR, and we're making pornographic, misogynistic, horrifying animations of women and just talking about them as technology. No one talked. I mean, it was so shocking. They never mentioned what they were doing. I would show them. I have pictures, but I don't, you know, maybe they'll shut down our class or something. But it was that bad. So that activate, I'm laughing about it now, but it was it was scary.
Horrifying. Yeah, it was horrifying.
So
I'm
that
sure.
really, yeah, it was horrifying. And so I went on a mission. I was on a mission. And the first thing I did was I wrote papers and wrote about it and published enormously because I was trained as an art historian. I knew how to look at things iconographically and to put it into a larger historic view. And I talked about all male cultures and the tradition of men trying to recreate the world to give birth. I talked about this desire for men to build a world without women. And I was always critiquing and analyzing, and that got built into my practice. So yes, the ruins, what we're about to talk about, I was intentionally choosing the great white patriarchs. And when I go back to showing the movie, and you'll hear the voices, it's not just that I'm playing Matisse and Picasso, but I'm making audio performance piece where I'm speaking in the voices of Thomas Jefferson, Henry Ford, who was the worst racist, anti-Semite creep, actually, beyond belief. I mean, I was also people I didn't know about until I read, you know, until I was researching. Jefferson was trying to be good, right? Although a slave owner who, you know, with many children, with numbers of children, actually. The other one was Walter Gropius, the Bauhaus, the German Bauhaus, who in fact did flee the Nazis and came to Chicago and reestablished the Bauhaus movement there in Chicago. So it was a big thing in the culture. I lived there for 10 years while I was teaching. I now teach remotely, so I teach online. I don't go back. And then the final one that I used the voice of the great white patriarchs was Jim Jones. I doubt people remember who that is if you're young. But when I was young, it was a anti-communist Christian cult where they drank the Kool-Aid. That's where the expression drink the Kool-Aid comes from. There was a mass suicide, and it was a cult that he was the center of, and he was abusive, and abusive to women, and then had them all commit suicide. So I'm performing and bringing these voices, and they sound like devils. You'll hear them, or creepy. And I'm making this enchanted world that is a museum. I kept thinking, there's a famous quote from now I forgot. History is a nightmare from which I'm trying to awake. James Joyce, right?
Yeah.
Said, history is a nightmare from which I am trying to awake. So history is this enchanted world for me, filled with these voices of the patriarchs that are both scary and giants, scary giants, that me as a little woman, or, you know, I am sort of short, actually. So it's like, but I'm fearless. I'm fierce. And I had to be because I was 100% in this total macho, like crazy macho. You've never known anything like that either, probably. It was so weird.
Yeah.
But
So
anyway, does
I,
that answer
as
your question?
it does, and as we transition, because I
Do you
know
want
I
me
want
to
to give
go?
you time to show us the ruins, but I can't help but wonder if that experience is also what led you to be an educator too, because that's a bit of a departure maybe from what you had almost been been doing. How did you get into the educational side of it as well?
I never taught until I was 47 years old or 48. Yeah. So uh, I did it basically because a friend of mine had lent me students from Pratt Institute, and the kids said, "Oh, you should teach. This
Mm.
is our favorite class." They were my interns. So um, when I started teaching, even there, and that went on, I entered an all male white space. And the students would taunt me. My first projects that I did were these erotic sleeping women. I can show it to you. I can show it to the class once we go back from Talking Heads, that I made to shock them because they were so shocked. They were making projects that were pornographic to try to freak me out. And I made these beautiful erotic sleeping odalies, and they got really freaked out. So there was a lot of, when I was making these sensitive, like poetic sleeping women,
Beauties, yeah.
and yeah, sleeping beauties. So and then when I got to the Art Institute, it was all white guys. They had one guy teaching there who was from the game industry. And they brought me in because Tiffany Holmes, who was the chair and is now the provost at the Baltimore, what is it called? MICA Museum, right? MICA, the Institute of Contemporary Art, it's school, right?
Hmm.
And she said I was the only person who wasn't from industry who'd applied for this job, and they hired me. And I made, I brought in. There were no. I just can't tell you. Like in my classes, I had this funny experience once where we were all on the elevator, and I had my all with giant people, and we were all like little tiny people, women, queer men, everybody dressed the most extravagant ways. We filled an entire elevator with 14 people. We were so different from everybody else within that. So I brought people of color. I brought um, queer men, women, and everyone, and women into an area where there was zero. And I created a culture. I mentored everybody. It was so important for me to create community. And we would look on the internet. We would go onto Facebook and say, "Hello, is there anyone out there who's like us?" And we found people all over. And my students would stream my classes with special software because you couldn't stream very easily then on Facebook, so other people could come and watch. And I would do panels with my writing partner Rachel Clark, and we did a project called Real Fake. I could show that also, where we were looking for other artists. Realfake.org, which is an archive and soon to be a chapter for Bloomsbury Digital Encyclopedia, new digital encyclopedia of digital art, where we were making exhibitions, giving talks at College Art Association. They were like born again meetings because people would come from all over and come to these meetings and say, "I thought I was alone. I didn't know there were others out there." People who were using these technologies in experimental and artistic ways rather than for industry pipeline. And I will tell you that not that my students don't go into industry. In fact, when you're teaching people to hack and break the software, they're very creative. They learn more quickly and they get jobs really easily as art directors, as opposed to a cog in a 500, person team, which they don't even do in the States anymore. Mostly that kind of labor is, well, probably isn't anymore because it was farmed out in China. And I bet these pipelines are now broken. But there was this kind of digital sweatshop thing happening, which was also part of the weird culture of this kind of high-end technology. Do you want me to go and show? Does that answer?
Yeah, absolutely. And we should definitely go into the ruins so that
Let's go back to share screen.
Yeah.
All right. So now this is a little excerpt from, you'll hear the voices where I'm speaking, and this is a labyrinth where I'm imagining myself as an art forger. And I'm both stealing that, all the little paintings that you saw are in this labyrinth from which you can't escape. And I also stole back some of my own images. Hopefully this will pick up. And wait, it's now, please, it's out of focus. It takes a minute to, let's hope that it comes. There, it finally, it clicked into focus. Wait, I'm going to make it louder. Can you hear it? It's a little too soft. Let me see if I can make it. No, it's as loud as it will go. That's okay. You can barely hear it, but what you do see is it's a 3-channel thing where you can see the models that are coming from the Matisse, and there's a Picasso. We can't really hear. Oh, you know why? I'm supposed to share in Zoom. Did we share that in Zoom when I entered? Can you hear the sound, David?
You could just, it was very light, but you could still see the images and you could faintly hear the sound.
All right. Well, if we go into the 3D virtual, the VR, social VR, you'll really hear it.
Right.
So in these, I also get commissions for. Previously, I would get commissioned by digital art places that do editions, and they buy your copyright for, basically you lose it for 10 years. And I found out, I learned that this was also a really bad deal, and I wish I hadn't done it. So I actually reappropriated my stuff and infringed on my own copyright. So this was all about copyright infringement. Here you see there's a Picasso model. There's coming up, there's a Cézanne, there's one of the Matisses, there's another Matisse, and you're tracking, there's more Matisse. So when I was doing it, I imagined myself as a forger who was forging, but it was very tongue-in-cheek and ironic, by copying the paintings as 3D low-resolution polygon models, like you would find in a game. So of course they're not forgeries. I mean, it's a complete conceit. There you see the orange painting. And at that point, NFTs were starting to happen. The idea of NFT as a blockchain, a minted, something that is protected by a contract. Wait, let's go. Let's see what else is in here. Let's go back because you mentioned, I want to show you a little bit about the NFT work, and that's an extension. But before we do that, you talked about me as a performer, so we might as well just show a moment of that, because it's still very much part of my work. So let's see. This is the dolls where I was working with the iconography, the heraldry of collapsed empires. And here's a little excerpt of projection mapping on a flat costume. It's from Las Meninas, the famous painting by, oh my God, now I forgot, Velasquez. And it was the former, she actually was Louis XIV's wife, but she was the last of the Habsburg dynasty. And I took her dresses, and I also, you'll see. Let's just see this little excerpt, because this is performance-based, very related to the world building. And this also is out of focus, and will take a minute to come into focus, I think.
Welcome. No. Welcome.
It seems very, it must be super blurry.
No.
Wait, let's see if we can make it bigger this way.
No.
Is that seeable?
Yeah, it was fine before, yeah.
No.
It was?
Yeah.
Oh no, now I did something horrible. Did I disappear it?
No.
Well, we can look at this one. This one was done in a movie theater. Whoa, it's going crazy now. Let me. Whoa. Let's go back. Technology, it just doesn't work, folks. The problem with, I'm going to go to my other browser now. Let's go to Vimeo. Maybe that will work better. Ah. Yes, it crashed. All right, so I'm going to go to Firefox. Yes, that one is good. So let's go. I think that's great to see, so I'm going to come back to it. Because the idea of immersion is such a yay, Firefox. I'm going to skip.
That's much sharper.
Oh, come on. That's fed in real time, so the patterns are all feeding back. And that's the Las Meninas dress that I modeled, but it's also like a paper doll dress that I'm projecting on. And those are all the heraldry of collapsed empires over the history of the whole world, from every culture, from Rome to Japan, China, Louis XIV, the Romanovs in Russia. So I'm always interested in cultural decay and collapse, the idea of the ruins. So it's in keeping Western culture as a kind of eternal collapsing thing.
Is your body painted as well in this, your face and body?
No, it's just with a white pull-on suit,
Oh, I see.
like you can get on the internet.
Gotcha.
Classic fetish wear. You can, with a hood.
Sure. Yeah. I could tell that it was white, and that's why the projections
But that's
were showing
why,
up.
yeah. So I'm turning everything into a movie screen, and and that's what immersion is, right? You're living inside of a kind of game space, immersive world.
Very cool. In these, as we start to wrap up and in the last few minutes here, can you tell us about, the hub site and
Yeah, let's go into that. So here, that's like projection land, right? Where I'm creating it in a 3D environment and then mapping that onto the real world. So it gives it this artificial feeling. So if we go back here, I'm going to go to Chamber of Dreams. So here, this room, the ruins, Ars Electronica, which is a very well-known, that's the actual show. And Ars Electronica is a famous festival that's in Linz, Austria. And when the pandemic happened, they decided to do remote sites. And so I decided to build that show as a social VR in hubs. And so that I could be part of the festival, but I would be in the cloud. They wanted me to document my show in New York and make video. And I was like, video? No, I'm going to simulate it. So here on my site, actually, this is Chamber of Dreams is another website I have. And if we go into that, I'm on Firefox, which is good because that's the other browser, Opera, is usually my friendliest browser, but today it was not so friendly. Maybe because of Zoom. But everything is an ad. It gets very irritating. So anyway, here is Chamber of Dreams. So the Ruins exhibition, me speaking in voices, I was collaborating with Edmund Campion, who's the director of the Center for New Music and Audio Technology at UC Berkeley. So it's a research facility and I'm a fellow there, and we've been working on developing live performance within a VR space, meaning social VR, that people could go into a space and assume an avatar, which we can all do once we're done with the class, and perform both in the real world and be channeled into this kind of artificial environment. So I did this version of that show in Mozilla Hubs, and I'm going to enter it before you all can. I'll just show you a little of it. And you should go on, it works on Firefox the best. As you can see, all these browsers at this point, they're not really set up to have multiple technologies running on them, like Zoom meets Claudia's crazy websites that have millions of movies and hook into other websites and then hook into social VR, right? So
right.
This one I think will work, and I'm going to enter this.
Once we get just a little tour, we'll do our final poll. So if folks do have questions, put them in the chat, and then we'll all meet up with you. We will put this link to the hub site in chat as well, and folks who want to, after the session, join in hubs, we'll be able to do that and talk with Claudia there as well.
You can hear how noisy it is once we're in the hubs. It was so it's the same. This is what you'll go through when you enter. And you can hear that little mouse. I tend to perform in all of these things. And Ed and I, we've been working together for 30 years, and he's the one that turned me on to the fact that I was that's not true. I was doing plays and theater, and his daughter is like a little me more than his wife, who's a good friend of mine. She's the cellist that appears in all my work and plays. We're like a family of crazy performers and musicians.
Artists, yeah.
Yeah. And we've all worked together for 30 years. So here is the show. So here you can navigate by putting your finger on the left mouse button, and I'm inside an avatar body. When others are in there, you'll see us, and I'm going to change my body. Let's see what my body is. That is a very simple, I like this. It's a very sort of metaphysical body. But if I change my avatar, I'm going to go into the featured ones. So I also like the space person because it goes with my decor. Now I am, yes. Wait a minute. Where is it? Oh my God. I'm sure it's here. Oh yeah, it's up here. I have to just close this. Okay. So now I'm the space person, and you can see who's, okay. So now I'm looking out at the other planet. That's my Matisse noise, but it's also the red planet in which, and I'm rotating around and I'm looking through the space person's eyes. And there is the one that's in your show.
Right, the orange room.
It's moving.
Yep.
Yeah. And this is when I discovered the power of social VR, because when everyone was quarantined, I seemed to spend a lot of time with people, including older people who were very afraid of going into of a game, right? A VR where you wear a headset. But I was able to get them to enter through browsers, and they wouldn't leave. They loved it so much. I found myself talking to 75-year-old collectors.
Wow.
Or people who are normal, and they would stay for hours. There is the table pieces I did as a low resolution forged copyright. And here is the 3D channel game world. And you hear the noise of me singing. And if you hit the more button here, that's where you get your preferences. So the media volume, the incoming voice, the sound of my voice, but I can make this even louder. This is Bitform's gallery. And if we go back there, that's actually a link to another world. I think I'll pop into it just for the hell of it. That comes from the dolls, the live performance that you saw. I built also as an immersive online social VR world. So let's just pop in there for a minute.
It's very interesting how all of your work is connected as well, how you're able to piece back to that. It's very cool.
Well, that's what I talked about in the beginning, is that the endless history is this nightmare from which I am trying to awake, but can't. And somehow that museum that my mother put me in to wander in as a child, I have never left.
As we start to look at this, we do have a question that's come from one of our audience members. The question is, what was the learning curve that you faced with this medium? And what advice do you have for two-dimensional artists looking to get into this media as well?
I think it's very much easier the younger you are. And this is the doll's house as a house, right? The advice is that you might as well take a class to start, because it can be overwhelming. When I started, there were actually no classes. And so I did take a couple of classes at NYU's Center for Advanced Digital Applications so that I could use their lab, because you had to have a big Unix computer. And I just used to bother people. I would come up to them and say, how do you do this and how do you do that? But the main reason I did it, I'm going to turn the audio down here a little. So here's one of those doll's houses that was lying around in the background of the doll room. Is that this is one of those things. Wait, where's my 3D and immersive world building is highly complicated. I'm just turning the volume down. The kind of person who can do it is very attention to detail. But the real thing is either you fall in love with it and become obsessed, or you can't do it because it's so unbearably difficult. Not difficult. It's very procedural and detail oriented. And you have to be if you're not native systems person, you can learn it with patience. But the real way that you learn it is if you find it magical and you love being in that space, you will figure it out, because the way you do it is by making endless mistakes and doing tutorials and not following the rules, just clicking around and experimenting and then asking people. So good thing about taking a class is generally the schools have a lab. The best way to learn is jump up and ask somebody at the table next to you, how do you do this? Because I keep making the same mistake over and over.
I
So
think
you have to, yeah, what?
I was just going to say, even for some colleges and universities, I think it's evident that we're still learning as administration too, because where these courses end up in which department is still sometimes unclear at different places. You see them in the arts department, you see them in digital media. Sometimes these are things in gaming design. They have a lot of different names, so finding those courses could be difficult, but I think that's indicative of where we are, where we just don't even as academics fully understand this world yet either.
I don't know if it's just that. I would say it's deeper than that. I'm going outside now. The reason why it's deeper than that is what you do with this kind of software is you're simulating reality, and you do that, the interfaces for these things, and I think that's worthwhile talking about. The interfaces use the language of all of the sciences, from physics to kinesiology to the physics of materials, gases, forces, the way eyes work, the way cameras work, lenses work. The interfaces are huge, and they all use actual big data crunching. Like if you want to know how to make granite, you Google granite and you find out what are the qualities and numerical qualities of the way people who study rocks have terminology. And then granite has certain numerical values in related to hardness, reflection, porousness, all these things. And then you actually use the same numbers. So it's what you call an epistemological software, a software that puts together all human knowledges about various sciences into these very elaborate interfaces. So either you love that, and it's a chance to, I as a kid who grew up indoors, I never looked around at nature until I was trying to simulate flowers and the sky. And I thought, oh, the only way I could figure this out is go look at clouds, because it uses the science of clouds. And so, believe it or not, you can figure it all out because you are in something that crunches big data and models reality. Well, how do you put that in a department? Because everything is that. It can be applied in so many ways. It belongs in every department at this point. It is everything.
That's a great point.
And that's why the only thing that changes, David, are the cultures around it. So if you're in a game culture or a design or medicine or whatever, the culture in that is going to be different than in an art department, which values making mistakes and being innovative. It's different cultures around them, but it belongs everywhere.
That makes perfect sense. We
All
are
right,
almost, yeah, we're
yeah.
almost at time. So I'm going to go ahead and have Stephen launch our last poll, and then also put up the link in chat to the Hub's website so that folks can join there themselves. And I'll pop over there in just a second myself and join you. And I know you'll be there as well.
Do you want to talk? Do you want to ask me more questions while they're doing their thing?
While they're doing their
For
last
sure.
thing. Yeah. I just want to remind folks that if they are going to join Hubs, to do that after they leave the session so that we don't have feedback with all the noise. I think really, I just want to thank you so much for all of this. It's been super, super enlightening. We could probably spend another 2 hours just talking about all the things we wanted to talk about. But I think this is going to be very helpful as people come back and see your work, the Orange Room at the Freedman, but also just look at digital work like this in general. I know you've opened my eyes to probably 100 different things today that make it really exciting. So I hope folks took some of that away from this, and I hope that they'll join us in the Hub session. Is there anything that you'd like to say though before we go?
I give all kinds of talks. When I give this was like in a funny way an introductory talk, because I think that people don't understand that that this kind of way that happened in games and Pixar and special effects movies has become the dominant language of representation in our time. So everybody is using it. And I think that also would help for young people, opens up art to people who might not have been interested before, because artists, we think conceptually, usually art is discursive. We like to think about things on a deeper level. We want to make things that make you feel and think more. But that doesn't mean it has to be alienating and dry, because we are using the same language that everybody that is being used everywhere else, including in mass culture. So it's come together in a way that's really normal. Maybe video and film was at every level, right? There were art films and blockbuster films, and so that's the same with these kind of technologies that come from gaming.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I'm going to join you. I'm going to pop off here.
So
And
I'm going to close out the Zoom also and go into the, let's go into, the one for the ruins. Okay.
all right, that sounds good. Thank you guys all for joining us. Come to see us at the Freedman. Thank you so much, Claudia.
All right. My pleasure. Bye.
Bye-bye.